Just remember, if something happens to me, it's because I've been telling the truth and they don't want that truth to continue going out there. But I did not kill myself.
I went through a very difficult personal health challenge. A few months I was in the ICU. I had been poisoned.
Today I am joined by Clay Clark, and we are going to try to get some answers on Dr. Rashid Buttar, who died suddenly. Thank you so much for joining me, Clay.
Hey, thank you. And I just want to say this real quick. Dr. Rashid Batar was a very, very good friend of mine. To give you a context, I talked to him every single week because he was a client and a friend. So anybody who's a client of mine, I talk to them every single week. And then I would also talk to him on the weekends and most, often during the weeknights as well. So I talked to him every week. And so his passing was something that hit me very hard. And so I want to honor his memory and anything I say today. And I'll be share with you that which I know.
Okay, sure. I was going to show this website really quick that Rashid Buttar, he was posting about this on Twitter right before he died. He had this big event coming up, the fifth annual Advanced Medicine Conference. And your picture's right there, Clay. You were going to be there.
Yeah.
And the whole thing got scrapped because of his sudden death 9 days before that event. Yeah. Tell me about how you found out about his death.
Well, I had a weekly standing interview with him every Saturday morning. And so I would call him on Saturdays and so the way it would work is we had a weekly meeting during the week. It was every single Tuesday. I have 160 clients, just to give you a little context, and about a third of them are doctors. And so you have a weekly time slot, and every week he was right on that time slot. And so I called him to confirm, hey, I'll see you Saturday. And then when I called on Saturday to do the interview, he didn't pick up. And I don't really do social media, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm a heavy researcher guy. And then General Flynn sent me a text and said, hey, did you hear about Rashid? Is that true? Is it not true? Is he alive? Is he not? Very unlike Rashid to not be on an interview when he said he would. And so at that point I thought, uh-oh. So I contacted his girlfriend or life companion and spoke to her. And at that point she confirmed he had just passed. So.
Wow. Have you found out how he died? That's what my viewers really want to know.
Well, I can tell you what I know about his passing. We had a Reawaken America Tour event, Ivory, that was supposed to take place, or that did take place in January in Nashville, Tennessee. And before that event, probably 30 days before that event, he called me. So we're talking December. So what are we now? June. So if anybody follows the timeline of when he passed, but this is in December. And he called me and he said, hey, I'm having some fluid build up on my body. And I wanted to see if you knew of a referral for maybe a cardiologist or somebody that could look at it, because I want someone who's not woke, not deep state, not controlled, that kind of thing, that can give me good feedback on that. So I gave him the numbers of the top people in Oklahoma. I happen to know some of the top folks in Tulsa, cardiologists, et cetera. And he had to have, right before the Nashville event, I don't want to exaggerate, I always want to honor his memory there, don't want to exaggerate, but he had to have about 40 pounds of fluid drawn off of his body. Now, this is before the event we did in January. And then during that process, as they were pulling the fluid off of his body, removing that from his body, he had a stroke during that process. So he had a stroke. And then after the stroke, he was, a couple weeks later, I mean, we called and prayed for him and, stayed in touch. But then we hopped on our weekly interviews and he looked like he had made a full recovery. He sounded like his energy was back. Things were looking good. We thought, wow, he and I would joke about that all the time. He's like, man, I'm so glad I made it for this interview. And it's kind of like gallows humor. He's like, man, I'm glad I made it for this week's interview. I thought I wasn't going to make it. And that was kind of a reoccurring discussion.
Shout out to the sponsor of my coverage. The signs of future financial trouble for American investors and savers are piling on in 2023. Bloomberg is warning of a severe economic reset, and gold appears to be a caged bull awaiting a catalyst. In May, JP Morgan senior team said, cut stocks, buy gold, and hold your cash. CEO of a major real estate investing firm declared it's really the perfect storm. Empty office buildings across the U.S. could lead to financial meltdown. Wells Fargo said gold is in a super cycle that could last another 6 years, and worst case scenario is $3,000 gold. The time for gold is here and demand is soaring. Let National Gold Group show you the options for investing in precious metals like gold and silver in your retirement account and for direct delivery. Mention my channel, Ivory Hecker, and you'll always get best in class service From Real American Service Providers, the National Gold Group IRA Fee Waiver Program allows you to invest your IRA or 401k into physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for their lifetime fee waiver program on qualifying rollovers. Call 888-617-5927. That's 888-617-5927. Get a free investor guide today by clicking that link down in my description. National Gold Group is a Consumer Affairs top-rated gold IRA dealer. 888-617-5927, and add the power of gold to your portfolio.
And then that discussion sort of faded away as his health restored. And then he obviously passed.
Wow. That's so sad. And many of my viewers think that he was killed. They feel like he was killed by the people who don't want his message to come out. So I'm trying to figure out if there's an answer to that, especially because Dr. Buttar, which I guess I've been saying his first name, pronouncing it wrong this whole time. Rashid.
Well, he liked to be called Rashid, but he wouldn't fight you if you called him Rashid. So, but Rashid is how he wanted to be referred to.
Well, he had said on a podcast that if anything happens to him, if he dies, he was killed because people don't want the truth out. So that has caused people to question even more.
Well, let me say this real quick. I'll just give you, I don't know. I'm kind of a light guy. And although he's my friend, when my dad died of Lou Gehrig's disease, I still like to be kind of an upbeat guy because that's how I process life. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of how I process this. First off is, there's I've gotten a lot of death threats, and he and I would joke about this. He's got death threats. I got death threats. I'm sure you've gotten crazy messages too, because the content you put out is so accurate. That's what you're doing is truthful. Therefore, I'm sure you've had threats, that kind of thing. And so he and I would kind of joke about that. Like, you get any good threats this week? And so that was kind of a thing. And I could say, and again, I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm just trying to give an example. I got into a really crazy accident. I don't get into car accidents, but someone T-boned me. Like, it was like somebody sped up to do it and they just weren't paying attention. But anyway, I didn't get killed. My wife didn't get killed. The guy in the car with me didn't get killed. But I mean, it was a wild accident in the white van. And a lot of people close to me were like, man, do you know who it was? And I appreciate their concern, but it just happened to be somebody that was driving aggressively and didn't look before crossing 2 lanes of traffic and accelerated into my driver's side where I was driving, spun the van around. It was crazy. And with Dr. Zelenko, that's the second example I'll give you. Great friend of mine, may he rest in peace. And Dr. Zelenko was really, really wanting people to understand that he wasn't a suicidal person. And I think this is something people need to understand. A lot of the people that are sharing the truth right now about the Bidens, they keep showing up missing. I'm sure you've seen this there. People that have discussed the Clintons show up missing. And so that is where a lot of that, I wouldn't call it paranoia, but a lot of that justification for that line of thought comes from. And so a lot of people like Zelenko and Rashid always wanted to cover their bases by letting people know, look, I've got my wits about me. I'm an optimistic person. 2, I'm not going to kill myself. I'm not going to stop fighting. And then 3, realistically, they did want people to know this wasn't, if they ended up missing or something happened to them, these were not suicidal negative people. These were positive people, Dr. Zelenko and Rashid, both of which were friends of mine, both of which were on the tour, and both of which had a lot of similar death threats. And so all I can say is I don't know what happened to Rashid, but I do know I had a little clip I wanted to play for you, Ivory. And I think this is the one that many people are probably people that know Rashid and the things he put out. There's a lot of things he said that were accurate, but very early. And he said this on the Maria Z show. I think she's sort of a contemporary. I hold you and Maria Z in a similar category. You're both investigative journalists that are unapologetic about your craft. You ask questions on the Ivory Hecker show that other people won't ask. And this is what Maria Z and Dr. Rashid discussed. I want you to listen to this. Here we go.
There's more than overwhelming evidence that these are 3 of these pathogens that are housed within the hydrogel that is used in the that are being given. Now, these 3 pathogens are innocuous. They're stable. They're inert. They don't do anything. You wouldn't even know that they're there. Okay, but the hydrogel is the fixative that is within. So it's think of it almost like a paraffin or cryo or something that's preserved. Okay, it's like a storage. It's a vehicle to deliver whatever they're trying to deliver, like the messenger, whatever else they're doing. But it's also fixating these things and keeping them stable. So they're essentially, it's a payload, very high levels. It's a payload of pathogens that are being held in this hydrogel, almost like a sleeper cell.
Now, if what he said is true, and it turns out, by the way, that there's a lot of technology in those that wasn't disclosed, and he had the working theory that the hydrogel could house pathogens that could ultimately cause Marburg. And one of the only people that I know of that was saying this as well, early having these kinds of statements early, would be Todd Callender, the attorney. Now, I'm not to say there's not other people saying this, but what I want people to know, and this is something that Rashid and I talked about quite a bit, I want people to look this up, okay, verify what I'm saying is true. In 2018, when Grimes went to the Met Gala, and I'm pulling up my notes here so I don't misquote anything, when Grimes showed up to the Met Gala in 2018, Elon Musk wore a jacket that said New World Order on the back of it. And Grimes wore a crown that was made of a color called Vanta Black. The color was Vanta Black. That's a patented color made by Surrey Systems. So Surrey Systems, what do? They make carbon nanotubes. What am I saying? I'm saying that Grimes showed up at the Met Gala wearing a black crown, which black typically symbolizes death. So it's like the Queen of Death showed up at the Met Gala, and on the back of the jacket of Musk, it says New World Order. And so these things would all seem to fit together, especially when the government was so obsessed with putting these nanotechnologies inside everybody. And the great researchers that you and I have gotten a chance to know, many of them I'm sure have been on your show, but people like Karen Kingston, the researcher from Big Pharma, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Dr. Carrie Madej, Dr. Rashid Buttar, Todd Callender. There wasn't a competition there, but many of them were breaking this sort of news on an ongoing basis. And I feel like that Dr. Rashid, Dr. Tenpenny, Todd Callender, Karen Kingston, Carrie Madej, and Dr. Zelenko were at sort of the forefront of that. And you think about Carrie Madej, I mean, she had a plane accident or a plane wreck, which is not normal. I mean, that was terrifying. Our prayers were with her. She survived. Dr. Zelenko died. He had one lung missing and he had cancer, but he died. And then Dr. Rashid died. So you think about the people that were at the front, Ivory, of exposing this, and you think about the circumstances that happened to them, or it's a I don't know, a handful of people in the world that were sounding the alarm about this first, and you've got a plane wreck and a death and another death. So I think that's a lot of the concern there as well. And so again, I process it as like, man, I hope these people are in heaven with Jesus. That's my hope. And Rashid was a devout Muslim, and he and I were always talking about the New Testament and the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel and Matthew chapter 24 and Luke chapter 21. And if anybody goes to our old shows, you can find on rumble.com, you just search for Dr. Rashid Buttar, you'll find him. He and I were always discussing the New Testament on our show. So my goal with Rashid was to try to get him into heaven with Jesus for eternity. And his goal was to try to alert people to what's going on inside the shot. So that continues to be his legacy, in my opinion, is to warn people about what was going on with the shit. And my legacy has been just trying to lead as many people to Christ as possible. So
in a podcast he did, sorry, I'm hearing feedback.
Sorry, it's probably just the size of my head.
Okay, hold on. I'm just going to mute you really quick to cut out the feedback. But I wanted to ask about a podcast he did the day before his death. He talked about the fact that he had been poisoned, he said, in January. Were you familiar with that?
Well, I do know that before our event, he had the most wild, 40 pounds of body weight.
Right.
So I mean, it's, so I'm just saying, that's a lot for a guy that would maintain physical fitness. This is a guy who was really focused on eating healthy. And so for him to have 40 pounds of body weight that was put on him, that is a suspicious thing. I also can say this year, Ivory, one thing we do on this Reawaken America tour is I try to make my phone number really available, so to the point that my wife is like, what are you doing? But when you go to timetofreeamerica.com, I always put out my cell phone number, and people say, why do you do that? It's kind of my tip line. So when people text to request a ticket to the Reawaken America tour we have in August or future events, that's also like my phone number. That's my cell phone number. And so people will text, 918-851-0102, 918-851-0102. And I've had nurses text me 2.5 years ago saying, hey, by the way, any patient that we treat up here at the floor that's given remdesivir, midazolam, and a ventilator, they die.
Wow.
And I'm going, come on, there's no way. And then turns out they're right. I mean, I don't hop on my show and blast people, but my initial reaction, Ivory, is a little bit skeptical, a little bit, you know how it is. And I'm going, really? And some of these women and men have driven to my office to show me their credentials, who they are, to show me, hey, this is where I work. Here's a pay stub. And I'm just telling you, this is real. And there's been people like Nurse Erin Olszewski that have exposed this on Tucker Carlson. I mean, so we're kind of living in that bizarro world right now where I think if I would have told anybody, 4 years ago, maybe that's 4 years ago, if I would have said, hey, Ivory, there's going to be like a transgender story hour for kids, and Joe Biden's going to be president. I think anybody would have been like, you're nuts. And if I would have said, hey, by the way, we're talking about right now introducing a programmable central bank digital currency, I think people would say, you're nuts. I think if I would have told people, the media is by and large controlled by six organizations, primarily, some could argue less than that, control most of the mainstream media. Are you, if you were to say these things to people and you were to say, did you know that the governors of many of your states are controlled by big pharma? Did you know that, Klaus Schwab's father, was close to Adolf Hitler? Are you aware that there's technology inside your body that ushers in the transhumanism agenda? Are you aware any of these things at all? You would people go, you're crazy. You're crazy. So what I try to do, Ivory, is I try to pray that God would grant me discernment and keep me focused on the main thing. And so the main thing that I have right now in my mind is making sure that people are exposed to the research of Dr. Rashid Buttar, make sure that his legacy lives on. That's why I told him I'd be happy to MC his event that he had there. And then when I found out it was canceled, I'm like, what? But my main focus is to make sure his message continues to go on there. Second is I would encourage everybody. I wouldn't let anything be, immediately dismissed as a crazy idea beyond the realm of plausibility, because I think that's how we've gotten here. I mean, I think a lot of the things that you were first and very early to expose, I mean, you've done a great job on your show exposing these things. I think it's one of the problems we've had, Ivory, is a lot of us weren't ready to hear what you were saying, because it was beyond the realm. I mean, we were in the mainstream, and we could handle things that were right here. We could handle like Coke or Pepsi, the Patriots versus the Dolphins. We could handle we couldn't handle like Epstein and RNA modifying nanotechnology and Bill Gates and Marina Abramovich, and all that was just, whoa, so I think right now we need to expand our concern for what is plausible. And I think that makes it easier to do the research. But right now, I cannot say irrefutably that Dr. Rashid wasn't poisoned. However, I would ask you this question. How many people do you know that are super healthy, physically fit, work out all the time, obsessed with their diet, who are doctors, who are encouraging people to eat healthy, to live healthy, to be healthy, and all of a sudden put on 40 pounds of water weight within like 2 weeks? I mean, you gotta understand how swollen he was. So was it a spider bite? Was it I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not going to disclose where he lived. All I can say is I know where he lived. It was kind of a remote sort of a hangout where I don't know how people would have gotten to him. And I can say he did come to events, multiple events, my events and others. And at those events, I know his events and mine, we've always had top-notch security. And I know of nobody else who had similar symptoms to him. So I don't know what to say there.
Wow, that's wild. I remember meeting him actually at your event there, where you're at your headquarters, where you're located, and he was very nice. And I was planning on interviewing him, and it never happened. But I was trying to figure out where he lived to verify that he had died, because I also had so many people reaching out to me about him, and some were saying, I wonder if he really died. Was his death faked to escape into hiding? So I actually, the public record said he lived in the Charlotte area. So I looked up his death record there, and there was none. Got the results back. There was none. So,
well, I can't tell you where he lives because I promised I wouldn't tell that, but I can say I have been there, and he just wanted to be very, very private with his life. The thing about Rashid was he spent a lot of time researching. Picture whoever it is that you think of that researches a lot, and then go beyond that. And so a lot of it's like uninterrupted research, not like he's being a jerk, not like he's a diva, but it's like a skilled songwriter or a skilled artisan might go away to, write their music or carve their duck or to make their quilt or whatever that craft is. And his was, he would research. I mean, if you haven't read his books are unbelievably cited and very focused. And he would call me for a weekly call, and he'd say, Clay, almost like Doc Brown from Back to the Future, do you know what I found? And I go, what'd you find? And he would talk about these things like this delivery system that could deliver Marburg and other things like that. And he had, really thought out his thoughts before speaking. He was a research twice before speaking once, that kind of thing.
Wow. Fascinating. Well, I know a lot of people are heartbroken that he died. They're
Right.
very grateful that he helped to open people's eyes early on in the pandemic. And of course, our thoughts and prayers go out to his family. He left behind kids.
Yeah.
His fiance.
Yep.
His ex-wife. It's very sad. Of course, all the people he helped. He was helping autism and cancer patients prior to the pandemic, which is another reason people are so suspicious about his death. There's been a lot of deaths of holistic doctors. So thank you, Clay, for answering a lot of people's questions today.
Yeah, and I'll just say this. For Rashid Buttar, he and Tenpenny and Zelenko and Karen Kingston and yourself and so many great people are trying to research. And this is the heart that I had. This is the same heart Rashid had. The reason why I do these Reawaken America Tour events, and there's other events, is not because we're trying to build a platform for ourselves. You don't get rich being Dr. Rashid Buttar. What you do is we're just trying to share the truth. And so that's why, if you go to timetofreeamerica.com to come to one of our events, we let you name your price. And I believe that his surviving family is going to be organizing an event in his honor. And I don't know the details of that. But again, the people in the fight, Tenpenny, Rashid, Bartlett, these people, they're not doing this to enrich themselves. Meanwhile, Fauci's like the highest paid or one of the highest paid government officials on the planet. So these are people that they sacrificed for the right reasons. And I would just encourage people, if you go to timetofreeamerica.com, you can see some of the videos we've done in the past. That's timetofreeamerica.com. Or if you go to rumble.com and search for Dr. Rashid Buttar, and he and I like to have a lot of fun. So I'd mess with him. He'd mess with me. So if you want to laugh and learn while celebrating the memory of Dr. Rashid Buttar, you can do that by going to rumble.com and look for Rashid Buttar.
Perfect. Check out that channel as well as timetofreeamerica.com. Thank you so much, Clay Clark. Great to talk with you.
Thank you, Ivory. Have a great day.
You too.